faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today I'm going to interpret the book Beyond Narcissism for you. Well, narcissism. We all have those people around who seem really narcissistic. They're either way too full of themselves or always admiring their own reflection. In this book, the narcissism we're talking about is actually narcissistic personality disorder. It's a kind of personality disorder called pathological narcissism. And narcissists aren't uncommon in society. Now, based on the DSM-4, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, about 6.2% of people in the US have narcissistic traits, and almost three-quarters of them are men. So, when we consider anything, they might act loving towards you on one hand, but constantly belittle you on the other. They might swear loyalty, but then go and cheat or betray. So, how does narcissistic personality disorder develop?
How can you spot a narcissist, and how do you get away from their toxic effects?
The book we're discussing today will give you the answers. The author, Jean Charpeau, is an expert in abnormal psychology. He regularly gives lectures in places like Paris, Asia, Myanmar, and supervises several professional organizations. His views on narcissistic personality disorder are recognized by the French psychoanalytic community. He has also written several related psychology works. The book we're discussing, Beyond Narcissism, is his representative work. The book was published in 2014 and achieved great success in France. We're covering the 2018 new edition, which incorporates reader questions and feedback with additional content. Le Monde, one of France's most important newspapers, commented that this is a masterpiece on the subject. The book has 110,000 words, divided into 11 interconnected chapters. It starts with how narcissists behave, why they're like that, and the psychology behind it, then shows you how to spot them in real life and rebuild your mental health. Of course, for narcissists themselves, reading this book is also an opportunity for self-reflection and redemption. But next, I'll break down the main content into two parts. Part 1. What is narcissistic personality disorder? What are its causes and psychological defense mechanisms? Part 2. What psychological issues arise from being harmed by narcissists?
How to stop being harmed?
First, let's talk about part 1. What is narcissistic personality disorder? If narcissistic personality disorder is a type of personality disorder, it often manifests as belittling language, contradictory behaviors, projecting their internal conflicts onto others to achieve psychological balance. And on the surface, narcissists might seem quite friendly. They might sympathize and help others, but in reality, they're emotionally cold. Their help is just to win people over. Okay, then they continue to use others to do things their way. Narcissists appear to have an inflated sense of self-worth. They believe they deserve extraordinary people or things, but deep down, they're very insecure. Once criticized, they easily feel ashamed and angry. Narcissists are good with words. They always sound very reasonable when they speak, but their purpose isn't communication. It's to manipulate and control people. They also derive pleasure from others' discomfort or self-blame. Narcissists always boss others around, almost treating them like servants, but they themselves refuse to give anything.
They're even stingy with praise. They only crave receiving attention and admiration.
It's important to note that the term disorder here is neutral. It simply describes deviations from normal states or pathological psychology. For example, what we commonly call OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, also falls under abnormal psychology but mild compulsive behaviors, like repeatedly checking if the door is locked after leaving, which doesn't cause significant distress to oneself or others. The narcissistic personality disorder we're discussing is the same. So, how does narcissistic personality disorder develop? The author believes that narcissistic personality disorder exists because narcissists' internal conflicts aren't properly resolved. According to psychoanalytic theory, when psychological energies shift and clash during growth, internal conflicts can arise, These energies typically manifest as thoughts, desires, or aversions. For instance, on one hand, craving food and wanting to eat. On the other hand, being conflicted, determined to diet this time. On one hand, wanting to attend a class reunion. On the other, worrying about running into someone you don't want to see. Everyone faces internal conflicts, and solutions include digesting them rationally, venting outwardly, or bottling them up inside. Some people can digest conflicts rationally. For example, if job hunting fails, they think, no big deal, I'll try something else, or work to improve themselves. If someone has internal conflicts but always keeps them bottled up, they might develop varying degrees of neuroses, like depression and anxiety. For example, failing an exam might make them feel so discouraged they even consider jumping off a building. But many people with personality disorders, like the narcissist we're talking about, they vent their internal conflicts onto others. Like when work isn't done well, they blame colleagues or the team, never looking at themselves for the reason. The root reason narcissists can't resolve internal conflicts properly is that their ego and superego weren't adequately developed during growth. First, narcissists' egos aren't well developed, so they generate more internal conflicts. In classic Freudian theory, the ego's role is to control the id. The id is the most primitive instinctual desires, like hunger or sexual urges. Everyone's ego is built during development. It's essentially learning to balance hopes and disappointments. And, for instance, only a child who trips while walking would blame the floor. An adult doing that would seem childish. But narcissists remain like children. They always believe their personal desires and interests should be satisfied. Once unsatisfied, they become anxious, and that persistent anxiety keeps fueling internal conflicts. Second, narcissists' superegos aren't well developed either, so they can't resolve internal conflicts correctly. The superego represents moral values and ideals. It acts like a judge, suppressing and monitoring the ego. The main reasons narcissists' superegos don't develop well are inadequate parenting, education, or poor living environments during childhood. And so, basically, their sense of morality is weak. They feel no guilt, don't know behavioral boundaries, and think if I want it, I should get it, and throw tantrums if they don't. The book shares a case study. An artist who constantly belittled his wife eventually left home without warning. To others, it seemed like he was throwing away a good life. But the reason was that the artist's superego couldn't effectively restrain his ego. So when he felt marriage conflicted with his personal freedom, he chose to run away instead of holding himself to higher moral standards, like respecting marriage or his partner. Because both the ego and superego weren't properly developed, so narcissists have more internal conflicts and can't resolve them properly. Facing the imbalance caused by these conflicts, narcissists need defense mechanisms to restore balance. These psychological defenses let them transfer their conflicts onto others. Psychological defense mechanisms are self-protection methods we use in stressful situations, like telling yourself losing a wallet warded off bad luck. After job rejection, comforting yourself with the role wasn't right or the HR doesn't recognize talent, these defenses can boost morale and ease pressure. But over-relying on defenses can cause behavioral withdrawal or psychological issues. For example, someone who constantly blames others for job rejections won't improve skills or practice interviews, making employment harder. Or if they avoid work to escape pressure, they might get stuck in their comfort zone, eventually becoming unable to face the workplace. Narcissists commonly use 3 defense mechanisms. First, splitting. Splitting means dividing objects into all good or all bad parts to maintain acceptance. As infants, we all believe we're merged with our mothers or the external world. When babies realize mothers don't always satisfy them, they feel anxious. To cope, they split mother into good and bad images mentally. This lets them love the good part without rejecting the whole mother over the bad part. This is a normal psychological process. As we grow, we learn to distinguish ourselves from the external world without extreme anxiety when unmet. But narcissists fail to progress beyond this stage. They keep using splitting, now dividing themselves into good and bad parts. For example, the single good self is honest. The single bad self is deceitful. After splitting, narcissists only face and accept their good parts while avoiding the bad parts, restoring inner balance through self-deception. The splitting defense mechanism makes narcissists use contradictory behaviors, helping them fragment their conflicted self and ease internal turmoil. The book describes a woman named Pierrette, whose views on romantic loyalty were contradictory. On one hand, she demanded extreme fidelity, constantly telling her boyfriend Jacques how crucial mutual loyalty was. On the other hand, she herself frequently cheated. Here, Pierrette kept fidelity values for herself while splitting off negativity to resolve her inner conflict. But while she found relief, others were left bewildered. Psychological research citation. Psychological research shows that long-term exposure to narcissists' contradictions distorts victims' perception of reality. The result? Victims get manipulated into bearing the narcissist's internal conflicts. For instance, Jacques suffered immensely in his relationship due to Pierrette's constant contradictions. And note, we all say contradictory things sometimes, but unlike narcissists, normal people recognize inconsistencies, self-correct, apologize, and take responsibility. But contradiction becomes a weapon for narcissists. Even when confronted, they argue stubbornly or rage, never reflecting, and gain psychological pleasure from others' distress. The second psychological defense mechanism for narcissists is projection. After splitting conflicts, narcissists throw negative feelings they should bear onto others. That's projection. Post-projection, narcissists regain balance while others become carriers of their psychological symptoms. Connecting behavior to psychological function. Projection leads narcissists to constantly belittle others, avoiding self-blame that would distress their fragile ego. For example, after divorcing, Frank shared custody with his ex-wife. Once when he was to take their daughter to school, he failed to do so. So Frank had his ex-wife pick up their daughter. When his ex-wife said she couldn't go, Frank flew into a rage, accusing her of dumping all the childcare responsibilities on him. Here, Frank didn't try to solve the problem or admit his anxiety. Instead, he projected his helplessness and anger onto his ex-wife. The third psychological mechanism for narcissists is denial. As mentioned earlier, projection involves narcissists dumping their unresolved inner conflicts onto others. Denial here means narcissists refuse to admit their mistakes, so they don't have to face their imperfect self-image. Narcissists struggle to accept loss and failure, like illness, career setbacks, or life decline. So they often use denial to cope, making them indifferent or cold to the trouble or harm they cause others. They're also arrogant, constructing a false but perfect image that makes them seem super confident. But once that false image is exposed, they plunge back into intense inner conflicts. Thus, to maintain their perfect image in front of others, narcissists are willing to pay a high price. Narcissists use these defense mechanisms to transfer their inner conflicts to others. Over time, others will want to escape. To keep someone bearing their conflicts, narcissists use 3 methods: attachment, isolation, and repeated discard and reclaim cycles. Attachment means narcissists choose close ones like parents, children, or partners as long-term punching bags or scapegoats, because these relationships are strong and not easily broken. Second, after attachment, to prevent escape, narcissists stop victims from seeing through their behavior. Purpose. The most common method is to prevent third parties from entering the relationship. For example, if the victim's friends or family appear, since third parties might help them see clearly, this is isolation. Through attachment and isolation, narcissists keep victims close, forcing them to bear the inner pain that should be their own. For instance, take Frank mentioned earlier. Once when he and his wife hosted her best friend at home, and after he went out shopping, he returned to find his wife and the friend whispering on the bedroom bed. So Frank flew into a rage, accusing his wife and her friend of defiling the bed, and kicked the friend out.
This left his wife utterly devastated.
Later, the friend even cut ties with him over this. Actually, Frank had long been jealous of his wife's close friendship. By causing this scene, he both isolated his wife and redirected his jealousy-induced anxiety. And, beyond attachment and isolation, narcissists repeatedly use discard and reclaim cycles to trap victims. Because when victims are thoroughly confused, they're more likely to stay with the narcissist.
Take that narcissistic Pierrette. She'd constantly threaten to break up with Jacques, not because she meant it, but to vent emotions and torment him.
After each outburst, she'd reel Jacques back in, either expressing regret or blaming him for not understanding her struggles. Soon after Jacques returned, Pierrette would repeat the cycle, leaving him exhausted yet unable to leave. These three methods make it extremely hard for victims to break free from narcissists. Sobering reality check. Cutting ties means losing family bonds. If they're a spouse, it means losing family and possibly children. Precisely why leaving is so hard that victims try to adapt instead. Sadly, victims often reach breaking point while narcissists keep playing their manipulative games. Now we understand narcissism's origins, defense mechanisms, and resulting behaviors. Hearing this, you might ask, don't many people show these behaviors? Does that make them narcissists? First, narcissism is indeed common in abnormal psychology. Many personality disorders contain narcissistic elements. Contemporary psychology has the dark triad theory, dividing human darkness into Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism.
Machiavellianism means excessive rationality and coldness, achieving goals at any cost. Psychopathy involves poor emotion management and impulsivity.
In the dark triad, most psychopaths are also narcissistic, but this doesn't mean every narcissistic behavior indicates narcissistic personality disorder. The author points out that many people show narcissistic traits at times, like occasional bragging, sarcasm, belittling others, or taking without giving in relationships, but we can't label them all as narcissistic personalities. Identifying narcissistic personality disorder requires professional intervention.
But if someone's abnormal behavior severely torments those around them, disrupting normal life or relationships, we should act to prevent further harm.
In part 2, we'll discuss the psychological issues faced by long-term victims and how to stop the harm. Generally, prolonged exposure to narcissists causes 3 escalating psychological symptoms. First, mental confusion and tension. Narcissists' contradictions make victims increasingly doubt their own perceptions of reality. Long-term self-doubt creates mental chaos, making victims hypervigilant and paranoid, constantly sensing danger but unable to pinpoint it. The book gives an example. Estelle's narcissistic boss would randomly praise her as amazing, then later threaten to fire her for being terrible. Estelle grew so anxious she never knew whether the next meeting would bring praise or termination. When victims can't process this psychological pressure, they may sink into depression. The second symptom victims develop is the gradual destruction of psychological defenses. Over time, victims' psychological defenses weaken around narcissists. For instance, victims initially deny or resist verbal attacks, but slowly, like frogs in boiling water, they internalize the abuse, believing, maybe I really am inadequate. Take Jacques. His girlfriend Pierrette's hot and cold behavior made him think, relationships are hard, but we truly love each other.
Result? When Pierrette played breakup games, Jacques didn't question her behavior. He just agonized over failing their true love.
When psychological defenses are severely damaged, depersonalization occurs. Depersonalization is a mental disorder where one detaches from their self and external world, experiencing unreality. While facing prolonged, unmanageable situations, people may adopt this self-destructive defense to preserve themselves. The book shares Bernard's story. His narcissistic father abused him, but Bernard said, "He only hit my body, so my heart didn't suffer." Here, Bernard separated mind from body, becoming an observer of his suffering, using depersonalization to endure violence. Later, Bernard frequently used depersonalization to resolve other conflicts. When conflicts came externally, he'd ignore them. When conflicts came internally, he'd withdraw into himself. Gradually, Bernard became increasingly isolated, ending up living alone, cut off from the world. The third symptom victims develop is extreme behaviors, emotional outbursts, violence, and in worst cases, suicide. For instance, the narcissist Pierrette eventually broke up with Jacques. But afterward, she joined Jacques' theater group and tried seducing every man there just to humiliate him. Well, finally, Jacques lost control and lashed out publicly.
Pierrette quickly said, "See everyone."
We broke up because of his bad temper. In reality, victims' outbursts stem from needing to release the narcissist's inflicted emotions and pressure.
Aww.
To outsiders, victims appear unstable, and worse, they may commit suicide.
Unable to bear the pressure yet incapable of becoming abusers themselves, they self-destroy. With narcissists causing such psychological harm, how can people escape? The method involves 3 steps. First, seek help. After prolonged exposure, victims grow accustomed to the torment and gradually lose themselves. What's urgently needed is to see the situation clearly and free themselves quickly. But the problem is, many victims are people pleasers with accommodating personalities. They fear handling negative emotions and hesitate to express their own desires. These traits make it hard for victims to take the first step towards seeking help. So victims should consciously discuss their situation with others and express their true feelings. This creates opportunities to gain useful perspectives and suggestions from third parties. Third parties can be objective friends, therapists, or lawyers who help reveal the narcissist's true nature and facilitate change.
Narcissists can't tolerate third parties because they might expose manipulation tactics, causing severe anxiety.
This ironically proves how essential third-party help is for victims. The second step to escape narcissists is breaking control, with 3 sub-steps. First, victims should stop engaging in dialogue with the narcissist. This means not justifying yourself when facing belittlement, because any justification lets narcissists dismantle your arguments and control the narrative. For example, when a narcissist says, "You're completely incompetent," victim, if you say, "I'm not incompetent," the narcissist will nitpick. Was what you did perfect then?
Instead, flip the script. What gives you the right to judge?
This redirects the question back to the narcissist, something they can't handle. Forced into this position, they'll stop attacking. Second, victims must state clearly they won't tolerate the behavior anymore. If the narcissist persists, use decisive actions like skipping meetings or ignoring calls to block manipulation. Finally, victims should stop trying to understand the narcissist. This means no longer analyzing their contradictions or wondering, why do they do this, etc. Abandoning understanding is actually more crucial than stopping dialogue, because even if you stop taking their calls, if you're still dwelling on that awful stuff, you're still being affected. Remember, narcissists have personality disorders, so don't expect them to change easily, and don't naively think you can change them. Leaving narcissists is tough, but for your mental health, victims should strive to get away. As the book says, the best gift we can give narcissists is leaving them. Step 3 in escaping narcissists is self-reconstruction. After breaking free from their control, the most important thing is to start anew as soon as possible. Self-reconstruction has dual meaning. First, rediscovering your true self. Those days with narcissists often alter victims' psychology and behavior. For example, turning sociable people reclusive, cheerful ones gloomy. Victims should reclaim themselves. Be social if you were. Don't suppress your vibrant personality. Only then can you dispel the shadow cast by narcissists. Second, becoming a better version of yourself. Because certain victim traits make them targets for narcissists, so targeted self-improvement prevents future victimization. Like no longer sacrificing yourself to maintain relationships or excessively suppressing desires, victims can refresh their social circle, meeting new friends who understand their situation and support growth, while learning self-kindness and objective self-assessment. That covers specific methods for escaping narcissists. Of course, leaving narcissists isn't easy. It fundamentally means changing yourself, as written. When we change, our relationships transform too. Some who endured narcissistic families turned pain into resilience, escaped manipulation, and became their best selves. Nelson Mandela said in his inauguration, "As we free ourselves from fear, our presence automatically liberates others." This quote can also inspire narcissists to confront their inner conflicts and break free. For all victims of narcissistic behavior, it's crucial to bravely step out of that lifeless existence and truly liberate your own life. All right, that wraps up our interpretation of Beyond Narcissism for you. You'll find the reading notes below the audio. See you next time.